Hello. Hey guys. Happy Thursday. I hope the sound is okay. I play these copyright free playlists, and the one I usually use, the fun children's one, I don't know, it was doing the weirdest thing, and it was like crazy jangling noise. It was like two things playing over each other, and then Druid was maybe having some internet troubles. I'm like, what's happening? But I think everything's okay. So, and hopefully I sound okay. So, thank you, Jared. Um, so, happy Friday Eve. I cannot wait for the weekend. I'm so tired of election coverage. That is all I will mention about it. It's ground me down into dust. And yeah, I feel like this week has been very unproductive. I don't know how you guys are feeling, but yeah, like I've spent way too much time in front of the TV and So, on to more important things in our life, which is quilts, right? um, so, today I thought we could look at some databases because, I end up looking at a lot of databases all the time just because they come across, they come across my desk and, there's usually interesting things in them. And when I say databases, I mean a lot of times we're talking about obviously newspaper and those kind of databases, but also collections databases, museum collections databases. And I wanted to take a quick look at the Quilt Index because, I mentioned it here and I know Jill and I talk about it, but I don't know if everyone is really familiar with what's in there. So I thought we could take a look at those things today. And the other thing, I'm glad Making a Musings, our dear friend Jen, is here because I wanted to share out of a book that she gave me. And this one's cute and fun. And then of course we'll get to the Lady of Godey's. I don't think we're on the chapter about Mary Had a Little Lamb yet. I think we still have another chapter to go before that, but we're getting to the end of it, and I'm moving on to a book about cotton next. We'll see how dry that is. And then, if you guys have any ideas for any early 20th century books, I think the one that's like the newest I've read was Avril Colby's book from the 70s. But, I'm really trying to keep the copyright stuff, the stuff where people are still alive. I try to keep those like off of the mainstream just because it's a copyright issue and I don't want to step on anybody's copyright. I don't want to be the problem in anybody's life, particularly for people in my community who publish books about quilts and textiles, obviously. But yeah, those ones from mid-century to earlier, I feel like they're fair game. And especially the public domain ones. So I'm going to be combing through my stacks to see if there's anything good after this cotton book, pending how the cotton book goes. But yeah, let me know if there's anything that you've come across that we could look at. So let's look at this book a little bit. So first of all, my friend Jen, Making a Musings, our dear friend, she asked me if I had this book and I said no. So she gave it to me. Well, at the same time, these two things are independent of each other, but they have made me think of each other. I have been working on this sewing roll project that our friend Dawn Ronigan patterned. And if you follow me and Jill on Quilt Nerding, you know that we read Dawn Ronigan's book a while back. It was Antique American Needlework Tools. Fantastic book. If you don't follow us on Quilt Nerding, it's worth checking out just to see what we talked about because it is a fantastic book. If you like needlework tools, if you like vintage and antique stuff, it's a really good book. But she also she patterns antique quilts, samplers, and some little sewing projects, including a sewing roll. So a sewing roll, if you're unaware, is just like a little pouch or a little textile doodad that holds things like thread and needles and, small pieces. And the one that she just recently released is called Benefactor's Diamonds. And the reason is because it's got English paper piecing diamonds. It's made up of all of these little small diamonds. Now, I love English paper piecing. And if that is something you're unfamiliar with, in a nutshell, it's a piece of paper that is cut to the shape, and you wrap fabric around it, and then you stitch them together. So that's in a nutshell what it is. And you kind of see what these look like. And then this is what the back looks like. It's a little furry looking because of all the little edges of the, the little tabs and edges of the fabric. I've got fluff all over my hand. And so because this is a sewing roll, it's long. And I'm a big talker when it comes to sewing stuff, and I'm like, oh yeah, I love English paper piecing. Like, yeah, that's small. Those pieces are small, but I've got that. I've made little quilts before, little things. Famous last words, y'all. This is not a difficult pattern. It is just time consuming. All these little pieces, and I'm not a big fan of glue basting. I will put like a little dab of like glue stick glue just to get the paper piece to stick to the fabric, but fully gluing down the edges to the paper piece I don't like to do because it makes them difficult, and sometimes you can see the glue through and stuff. So I did virtually all of these except for the silk ones. This is a silk fabric, this red. I did glue baste that because silk is horrible. It ravels. So I knew that paper piece wouldn't be coming out, so I just glued the heck out of it. But the rest of them, you do a stitch to keep the fabric around the paper, and then you have to stitch them together. That takes time. So I've been working on this. It's only like eight pieces wide. So if you look at it that way, you're just kind of working in multiples of 8. Too sticky. Yeah, I have to say I do like glue stick for some things. Sometimes in the little there's a applique glue out there. It's kind of like Elmer's, but I think it's a little bit stronger. It's called Roxanne's. I like to use that sometimes for complicated applique. But yeah, anytime you use glue, you run the risk of it showing through your fabric, or being difficult to pull off. If you need to reposition things, and particularly with things that you don't wash. Like, I won't wash this, so I don't want to do too much glue. Also, unfortunately, if you can't wash it and you've got glue in your textiles, glue can attract pests, so you have to be careful with that. So anyway, long story short, I posted about this the other day on social media, and I was teasing Dawn. Because this is a fantastic pattern. I love this thing. I can't wait till it's done. It's got these pockets that go on the inside. Those, of course, are also all of these little paper pieces. There's 5 pockets that go in this thing. And so now I'm at the point where I can line it. It gets lined with some silk, and then it gets bound with some silk ribbon, and then I'll be done. But I posted about it the other day, and I was teasing Dawn, and I was like, I don't know, Dawn, how many pieces are in here? Like a bajillion? And she's like, no, it is not a bajillion. But she mentioned something that made me think of this book. And then I said, you know what? My friend Jen gave me this book, and it's called Quilting News of Yesteryear, 1,000 Pieces and Counting by Sue Reich. And Dawn said, yes, I know this book, and here's a couple of funny things that I remember from it. And I'm like, oh yes, I've read some of those funny things. So this idea of making a quilt or textile object with many, many, many pieces in it is, to me, it's just like, it's a long road. That's the way I look at it. And I kind of break it down in my mind of like, well, how long does it take me to deal with each piece or each unit? If I'm piecing little pieces together, how much time does it take me to do like a chunk of work? Can I do little bits and pieces at night? That's how I approach these projects. And I don't think about it as like a badge of honor to say like, oh, this thing had, X number of pieces in it and I accomplished it and all that. That just doesn't occur to me. Like, I don't care. But at certain times in our history, people have been very, very tied to how many pieces are in their quilt, and it gets reported in the newspaper. And so Sue Reich pulled together, and she didn't actually write this book because it's newspaper articles. She edited it. So she pulled together all of these little newspaper articles and snippets, and they go from about 1873, I think. I think the first one in here is 1870s, definitely. Oh, no, I'm wrong. There's a couple from the 1830s. And then I think it kind of jumps to the 1870s, 1860s. Yeah. And then I think it goes up to the early 30s. And then I guess you kind of get into quilts that don't have as many tiny pieces. So the newspapers weren't reporting on it anymore. But yeah, like there's all these newspaper reports of like all the pieces used. And I'm going to read some to you because they're just hilarious. So first of all, I highly recommend this book. I wasn't sure what to expect. But aside from the funny little newspaper snippets, there's some really beautiful photography in here. And this is a Schiffer book. And so Schiffer makes really good, craft and quilting and history books. But if you get past the preface here, I mean, look at this. These are just close-ups. And I should have scanned some to to show it better. But you can see, I mean, these are nice, big, beautiful pictures in here that just don't have any text on them. So they're very nice to look at. And then, this is all before the first page. And then there's, just quilts in here. And as you can imagine, they are quilts with lots of pieces. I mean, that's the whole point of this. But some of them, I'm like, this quilt, maybe it's not this one. There's one in here that I'm just like enraptured with, but that one's really pretty. So this is a fun book. I think that, because I received this book gratis, I don't know how much it costs, but I'm pretty sure this is one of those books that you can probably find on Abe or something. So I would say if you find it at a reasonable price, pick it up because it is worth the pictures. Look at that. Gorgeous. So let's read a few of these. Now, there are lots of snippets in here that are like, oh, this lady in our community made this quilt and it had this many pieces and it looks like this and it's so wonderful. There's lots of those in here. I'm not going to read those. I am going to read the insulting ones because those make me laugh so much. So here we go. So this is from the Evening Gazette, Port Jervis, or Gervais, I think it's Jervis, New York, January 28th, 1873. Middletown disputes with Newburgh the honor of possessing a quilt composed of the greatest number of pieces. A correspondent of the Mail says, Middletown is still ahead of Newburgh on the patchwork quilt question. The Newburgh quilt contains 5,665 pieces, while a young lady of this place has one containing 6,272 pieces, a difference of 607 pieces. It was made by herself and completed before she was 13 years old. So that's another thing I've noticed that they love to put in the newspaper is, if you're a woman over 60, they're going to report your age because you're going to be an old woman of 61, an old woman of 75, a very old woman of 83, or you're going to be a very young woman and they're going to report that. So you're going to be 8 years old, 13 years old. Thank goodness the middle-aged women, they're in the middle, don't tend not to have their ages reported. But nonetheless, I'm like, you know what? Why you got to talk about ladies' ages? That's rude. Okay. Here's this one. And literally the titles of these things. Hey, Jan, how are you? Literally the titles of these sometimes just tell you everything. Like it's all you need to know. This one is also the Evening Gazette from Port Jervis, New York, November 11th, 1873. What a little invalid did. Two deftly formed quilts. Mary Louise Kleinstuber, a daughter of John Kleinstuber of this place, before she was 8 years old, pieced a quilt containing 1,945 pieces. She is not yet 9 years old and has since pieced another quilt containing 3,944 pieces. During the past 2 or 3 years, she has been an invalid, and the first piece was made while she was lying upon her sickbed and suffering great agony most of the time. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. An 8-year-old in sick bed, suffering with great agony, pieced a quilt that was almost 2,000 pieces. I can't wrap my head around it. Okay, there's one here I want to hold on to because it's probably my favorite that I've run across through this book. I haven't read it straight through. I've just kind of skip around. Some of the articles are lengthy. You know, they would have taken like a portion of a column. Most of them are just little snippets. Okay, so here's one. Evening Gazette, Port Jervis, New York. This Evening Gazette, they liked to talk about quilts. So this is November 30th, 1876. Another centennial quilt. Mrs. Haight, aged 65 years, residing at Wurtsboro, Sullivan County, and the mother of George Schoonmaker, fireman of this village, has just completed a quilt composed of 6,179 pieces, which is said to have been executed in just 2 weeks. This may well be termed the boss quilt. And all I could think of, you know, and I guess the term boss, quote, you know, quote, boss, obviously has been used for quite some time. But all I can think of is like a Street Fighter. Where you fight until you meet the boss, and then it's like, finish him. So the boss quilt got finished. All right, here's another one. From December 15th, 1876. This is the Wellsboro Gazette, Wellsboro, Pennsylvania. A Farmington girl, 13 years old, has pieced, I don't know why that's in quotes, a bed quilt composed of 9,000 blocks. A sad waste of time. How mean. I mean, she's a teenager. Can't we let her do what she does? Okay. I think this one's really scathing, if I remember correctly. Zanesville Daily Courier, Zanesville, Ohio, November 8th, 1877. Another silly Ohio woman has just completed a quilt containing 5,000 pieces. A woman who would spend her time over such worthless nonsense when there was so much useful and beautiful work to be done in the world ought to be ashamed of herself. Now, I'm hoping that these are op-eds and not the newspaper itself. Reno Evening Gazette, Reno, Nevada, January 11th, 1878. The champion time waster is now Rebecca Moore. She, who has just finished a quilt containing 20,173 pieces. The champion time waster. Okay. Denton Journal, Denton, Maryland. This is on the eastern shore of Maryland. December 14th, 1878. A lady in Somerset County has just finished a bed quilt, which she began 52 years ago. It has 6,000 pieces. 52 years. So imagine, I mean, maybe this lady, I mean, she could have started this quilt when she was 8 years old. So she's at least 60 or more. I liked that story. I like that. You know, if you can finish a quilt that you started 52 years ago, like, good for you. Okay. This is the Daily Constitution, Atlanta, Georgia. April 30th, 1880. Cartersville Free Press, Mrs. Seiler, mother of Mrs. Thomas A. Word of this place, is one of the most remarkable old ladies we have ever known. Remarkable and old. She is now 82 or 83 years old and is sprightly and active as a woman of 50. I'm not feeling terribly sprightly and active myself, so I know, lots of shade on industrious women. Yes! I mean, think about these years. The 1870s were, you know, a decade post-Civil War. Lots of places, you know, especially in the South, were still dealing with, you know, Reconstruction. And these poor women were probably just, you know, trying to do something they could be proud of. And people are like, yes, trash talking their efforts. Okay, so this 82 or 83-year-old woman is sprightly and active as a woman of 50. She is exceedingly industrious and is seldom idle. She says When she is not employed, she does not know what to do with her hands. She has on hand now about 20 quilts in patchwork ready to be quilted. We remarked to her that she ought to have occasional quiltings and get all the young ladies to help her do the work. But she replied that she was afraid the girls would spoil her work. Her patchwork is exceedingly beautiful, displaying great taste in patterns and exquisite neatness in sewing. She has just completed a quilt of hers last fall with over 10,000 pieces in it. It was quilted with great care. That piece of work she sent to the fair at Macon last fall, and we supposed she was certain of a premium upon it. But what was our surprise when we heard that she not only failed to be recognized, but the quilt was not even mentioned as an article of merit. It was a shame. So some of the newspapers have nice things to say. When they're not calling you an old lady. Let's see. The Wellsboro Agitator, Wellsboro, Pennsylvania. Agitator indeed. June 21st, 1881. Mrs. Levi Brown of Lawrenceville has made a bed quilt this year containing nearly 11,000 pieces of cloth. Such work as this looks like a sad waste of time. Evening Gazette, Port Jervis, New York. They love to write about quilts. July 21st, 1881. Mrs. Everts, mother of Mrs. S.S. Maston of this place, has made a quilt with over 8,000 small pieces of many colors. This shows considerable patience for a lady of 83 years. What has a lady of 83 years got to do? She's got all the time in the world. Come on. And I mean it this time. Okay. Allen City Democrat, Lima, Ohio, February 8th, 1883. The fool killer should be let loose on the woman who has pieced a quilt containing 36,000 pieces. The fool killer. What? This is insane. How about the Athens Messenger, Athens, Ohio, February 8th, 1883. The Lowell Courier says an East Brookfield woman aged 66 years boasts of having made a patchwork quilt containing 2 million pieces. It is not stated what she did between whiles, but we don't believe she made many speeches at women's rights conventions. Like they're needling this woman on all sides. A Norristown woman aged 88 years and blind has just finished a quilt begun 3 years ago containing, are you ready for this? 643 trillion, 274 billion, 610 million, 598,000 pieces. One of these items may be a little more difficult to believe than the others, but not so much. And so I don't know what the other is. It that she's 88, that she's blind, or that this quilt contained over 1 trillion pieces. Oh my word. Here's one. I'm sorry, because honestly, when you really think about it, it's not funny. This is like, it's horrible that people talked about women this way and the things that they did. They devalued them so much. But like the absolute nasty shade is just, I cannot even. So Stevens Point Journal, Stevens Point, Wisconsin, August 9th, 1884. A girl with soft gray eyes and rippling brown hair, who walked all over your poor fluttering heart at the charity ball, has like what that has to do with anything, I don't know. Just finished a crazy quilt containing 1,064 pieces of neckties and hat linings, put together with 21,390 stitches. Now here's the thing with the stitches. I'm like, how do they count that? Unless they're counting while they're stitching. That's insane. And her poor old father fastens on his suspenders with a long nail, a piece of twine, a sharp stick, and one regularly ordained button. Something tells me that's his problem, not hers. Oh, okay. I might be getting there towards the end here. The ones I marked. These are just absurd, honestly. I think that might have been it. Oh, no, here's one. I think this one is the second to the last. Yeah, okay. So this is the Bangor Daily Whig and Courier, Bangor, Maine, November 7th, 1894. And so the headline is Sagatahawk. I don't know what that has to do with anything, but an inmate at the old lady's home. I don't know why they have to call her an inmate. An inmate at the old lady's home in Bath is spending her days in sewing and counting. She is making a crazy quilt and so far has put 14,905,605 stitches into it. I really think, honestly, some of these, I think they just make it up. They're just making stuff up to sound good. Now, here's my favorite that I have found so far, because it's like the story of my life. The Daily Democrat, Sedalia, Missouri, November 1st, 1874. An Ohio woman worked for 9 years piecing a quilt to consist of over 1,000 pieces. 9 years, over 1,000 pieces. And when it was completed, her hard-hearted husband took it for a horse blanket. That is the story of my life. Oh my goodness, this book. Sue found just some of the most insane stuff. And it's cute things, it's cute, worth the read. But I would say the value in this book are the pictures. I mean, they're so good. I mean, look at that. And there's the close-up. Such beautiful, beautiful fabrics and things. So we'll come back to it. I'll keep looking for some nonsense in this book to share with you. Look at that. I mean, you can't even tell what that is. Those pieces are so tiny. And I think they're diamonds. Yes, they're diamonds. So they're like these kind of diamonds, but made into tumbling blocks or stars. Oh, and you know what? This says this quilt is in the collection of Barbara Garrett, Pottstown, Pennsylvania. Barbara is our friend. So I'll have to bug her sometime, see if she still has this quilt. All right, so that's a little sad humor for your day. Okay, so let's look at some collections, because this is I'm always excited to find a collection to look through, and some museums just probably don't have the bandwidth to put things online. Some of them don't want to, but I would say museums by and large are making efforts, particularly from COVID. When they had to shut down, they're making efforts to put their collections online, whether it's everything they possibly can or if it's just, certain pieces of the collection. And that's really exciting because even if you can't necessarily look at something like in high resolution, you still can get an idea of what you're looking at and not be disappointed. One thing that I kind of have run into when I was doing research, particularly with Dr. Dunton, because, those were not necessarily quilts. I was actually looking at like ephemera and letters and things. And one thing that was frustrating is I would get into, an archive and things would be indexed. And if you're not familiar with research, or, databases, how they work, an index is basically just like kind of a table of contents. So imagine, I'm most familiar with Dr. Dunton's collection. So Dr. Dunton's collection consists of, his letters, his notes, these scrapbooks, these biographies of quilts, like 14 scrapbooks, files of ephemera. So like quilt patterns, newspaper clippings, magazine clippings, actual complete magazines and things. And then he has photographs, and then he has, they're called lantern slides, but they're essentially like for projecting, like a slide. So all of those things. And then when you look at the finding aid, it's an index of all of those things. So it will describe like box number 1 has XYZ in it. Box number 2 has da 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 in it. And it might even go down to the folder level. So like box 1, folder 1 contains like all of the all of the correspondence that Dr. Dutton had in his files from people whose last names began with A. Like that might be what all you see. And so you're like, wow, okay, I want to see if he had any correspondence, say, with Florence Peto. So you'd have to look and see, well, what box would the letters be in? And then is there a folder specifically for the P's? So that's like you look at indexes. But a lot of times that kind of stuff is not online. They just have an index and they're telling you what it is. And so you either have to go there and request it and look at it, or luckily, a lot of libraries and archives and collections have somebody, whether they're volunteers, student volunteers, if it's associated with university, or, like a major like art museum, like I was dealing with the Baltimore Museum of Art. There is a library and archivist who works there. And so you can contact those people and they will, to the best of their ability, get you a scan, a picture, or more information on what you're looking for. So again, all of this is wonderful. All of this is great. But what's sad is when you have put all of your energy into this finding aid and you're like, I think I found the thing. And then you get it back, you get a scan or a picture of it back, and you're like, oh, that was absolutely not what I was looking for. So what most wonderful is when the organization, whether, again, it's a university, a library, a museum, whatever, when they have put their collection online, and even if it's not a really detailed picture, you can at least tell, like, oh, no, that's not what I'm looking for. Like, I'm looking for a quilt, and that's not a Baltimore album quilt. So I know I can just, wash my hands of that one and put it to the side. So that's kind of where I wanted to go with these collections, is because these are things you don't have to wade through an index or, cross your fingers and hope that you can find somebody to take a picture of it and just for you to find out if it's the item you're looking for. So that's sad. Let's start with the quilt index, because I think for our purposes, the quilt index really has the most goodness about it. It has all the stuff. So the quilt index is a project. Oh gosh, there's a bunch of people involved in this, but I think it's Michigan State University as the primary caretaker, I guess, for the quilt index. So this is what you see when you go to quiltindex.org. And let me pop it right there I'll put it in the chat so you have it. And so then you have across the top, you have your navigation. If you go to quilts, it is going to take forever. And it's going to load, I think, what they have set as featured quilts. Yes. So these are things I'm not sure how they choose to feature them. There's probably some kind of algorithm that puts particular things on this page. So sure, these are great to look at, but this is like there's no real rhyme or reason here other than they are alphabetical. So you can see A Mother's Love, Alice, All, Almost, obviously alphabetical. Now you might want to search. So the search is up here. And, I can just throw any old thing in there. Eagle. Oops. That's something I often search when I'm looking for eagle quilts. Oh, there's a lot of eagle quilts. A lot. So you can just keep loading stuff. A lot of stuff. There's something weird going on with my computer, of course. So anyway, and I'm seeing, this is interesting. If you're reading along with me and Jill on Tuesday nights, we're reading To Honor and Comfort. I'm seeing quilts that we know are in that book. For instance, this Black Eagle star quilt and these basketball quilts are actually in the book we're reading. And we know that they're part of the Michigan Quilt Project at Michigan State University. So that's kind of cool. You'll actually find, things listed in a book, and you can go here and it will actually be here online. Many of the state documentation projects have either uploaded their information or are in the process. And you have individuals that upload things too. And that's why you'll end up seeing all of these, it's the same quilt. And it's just different people happen to own the quilt or have made the quilt and uploaded it. And we've looked at the quilt index stuff before. You know that like all of the information that can go into a quilt record gets very lengthy. We looked at one the other day, and now I'm drawing a blank on what the quilt was, but I mean, it got into stuff like what is the maker's religion, so that like there's all kinds of data in there. And I think that in some cases people just don't have that information, so it gets left blank. But, if you're the quilter and you want to put your own quilt in here, or say, there's bicentennial, say your mother or grandmother made a quilt, you want to put it in here, and all of this information, it's creating this record that's going to be around long after we're gone, hopefully. So this is an interesting one. This is the bicentennial, like the bicentennial. And this is the creator, Betty Boyank. She is the person who created this bicentennial quilt pattern that utilizes this rounded corner star. And it's really interesting. I will show you in an Indiana collection. Somebody actually tried to make that quilt. They had some comments about it. But what is neat is that, you click on a quilt and it doesn't automatically open another page. It's just going to give you a little snippet. So you can see like, oh, okay, the date on this is something I want to look at. This is one of the fluffy butt eagle quilts. And, I can see a little bit of info about it. So I might want to view the full record, and then that'll take me to the full record. And then you can see we've looked at these records before to see how much info is in there. So that's basic. That's the basic search. You obviously can search and look for a particular pattern name. So, I might be looking for, a log cabin. That's probably a bad one because there's probably a million of them. If I know a quilt maker's name, if I know like a quilting group, if I know a Brackman ID number. Now, not every quilt is going to have the Brackman ID number chosen. So, some of these things, these advanced searches, if you're looking for quilts that have like a really, really, their record is very complete and comprehensive, then you're going to get those. But if you try to search on a Brackman ID number alone, you may not get what you're looking for. So, there's multiple different ways to search here. But, again, if you're looking at things like eagle, I'm looking at eagle, or I'm looking at bicentennial. Maybe you want to look at quilts made in the 30s. So you'd use a year range, and you'd find quilts that were, say, made from 1930 to 1939. So, depending on what you're looking for, there's all kinds of different ways that you can use this advanced search. Now, what I think is even more valuable in here are the collections, and the collections aren't going to let you search that way. Now, some of the quilts might come up, like within the Michigan State collection, there are eagle quilts, but it's better to try and search the Michigan State collection itself for things that I may miss by just typing in eagle. So I went to collections up here, and you can see this is an in process, the quilts of the Alabama Documentation Project. We actually looked at that book, I think. And then the Alaska Quilt Survey, that's in progress. But you can see there's, just all of these. California Heritage, Colorado, that one's in progress. The Hawaiian Quilt Research Project, HQRP, this is, again, something that if you follow along with me and Jill, the book that we're reading mentions this project. And here, when you go to a project like this, it's got a lot of information here. And then it will often have, a collection will have subgroups in it. So these are all of the museums that had quilts that were part of this research project. So you can filter down, and if you're looking for something specific within Hawaiian quilts, you might have to look at all of these. It really depends on what you're looking at. If you're looking for one particular thing, you might look out, find it right away. If you're looking for, say, Hawaiian quilts that feature, I don't know, a particular type of flower or a particular type of like a pineapple or something, you might have to go through all of these unless you know the maker or you know the time period. Do you understand what I'm saying? There's lots of different variables for finding the things that you're looking for, and it can be frustrating at times. I to make that clear, even understanding how these repositories work and that what you can search and what just is not actually searchable, it can be frustrating at times. And one thing, the way that I learned a lot about this is I took a genealogy course, and the genealogy course obviously wasn't using quilt databases or museum databases, but it was using public records databases. And a lot of times public records are also in sort of like a collection, and particularly things like Ancestry or Family Search, they will put things into collections, and it's just really it's ways to manage giant pieces of data, giant data sets, and to try and make them a little bit easier to navigate. But you still have to have an understanding of the collections. You still have to know that, as an example, if we're talking about, say, one of these particular museums, it is helpful to know that, say, the Kauai Historical Society collection is part of the Hawaiian Quilt Research Project. If I were looking for something that in this Kauai Museum collection or the Kauai Historical Society, it's helpful to know that. But also, I could say, well, I'm looking for things from the Kauai Historical Society. So I go to the list of collections and I say, Kauai's in Hawaii. So the Hawaii Quilt Research Project might be a good place to look. So sometimes you have to be creative. Sometimes you actually have to just kind of know. And Hawaii is a little bit easier because obviously, Kauai and, the places, Honolulu, I mean, these are recognizable as Hawaii. The Brigham Young University Hawaii collection. Did you have any idea that existed? Now, knowing that missionaries, Mormon missionaries in particular, brought quilting to Hawaii, that's a clue to you. But if you didn't already know that, possibly the only way you would find out is by looking at the HQRP page here, or their other documentation, or if you're over on some Brigham Young University information and might note that they have a Hawaiian quilt collection. So there are lots of ways for you to not know what you don't know. And that can be frustrating. So what I say is, if you are interested in doing research, and even if it's just for your own, education and not necessarily for publishing or writing papers or anything, poke around when you have time, because, I often research trying to narrow in quickly and specifically into one thing, like what I'm looking for. But it also pays to kind of, if something catches your eye, it's catching your eye for a reason. So make note of those things. And, you don't have to fall down a rabbit hole necessarily. I do all the time. But you can, make note of that, come back to it. There's lots of great page saving tools. You can have a million browser tabs open, which I don't love because my computer loves to restart. And then I have to go through my history and reopen a million browser pages. But this is a tool that I really recommend. And of course it's going to do weird things. So Pocket is a tool that you can add to your search bar. And I also have it on my phone as an app. And what you do is you want to say, I want to share or save this to Pocket, and it'll get shared, into your personal Pocket. And this is free. This doesn't cost anything. And you can do keywords. So I already have, quilt history, quilt pattern, all kinds of stuff in here. So I could just add that to here. And then I don't have to have that tab open. I can come back to it later. So this is another thing that I do when I'm researching and finding things that I don't need right now, but that are important. So one other thing that I think is a lot of fun on the Quilt Index is ephemera. Now, ephemera and collections do have some crossover in here because, for instance, Quest of Enberries files. She and her collections are on here from Michigan State University. Some of it is ephemera. Some of it is like newsletters and things. And then some of it is actual quilt kits and quilts and things that she had in her collection. So they're sort of split between the two different places. Ephemera on the Quilt Index is a little bit clunky to search through. There's a couple different ways you can sort this, but this is it. It's date, creator, and title. But the stuff that's in here, so good. Bits and Pieces Textile Tradition Symposium Papers. This is an excellent book. This is a book I have, but you can read it for free online. So these are things that are really, really good to keep an eye out for. All of these 3 or 4 books across the top here are they're the Union County Historical Society, Jeanette Lisansky. It was a symposium project that all of these, got published as all of these books. So they're papers. And these are worth so much. If you're doing the kind of research like Pennsylvania, Mid-Atlantic type of research, I highly recommend those. The Quilter's Journal was a project by Joyce Gross, a newsletter by Joyce Gross. And I think all of them are in here with pictures. So these are really great. All of the things that she wrote. But again, you have to kind of search it by, it's right here. The Quilt Journal, which is a separate project, not to be confused with the Quilter's Journal. Uncoverings, which is the AQSG journal. Now, Uncoverings, because of copyright issues, none of those papers have pictures. So what I can tell you is AQSG is in the process of changing that. I don't actually know much more about it than that, and it's in progress. But there's a committee in AQSG that is working on getting pictures into Uncoverings and making it keyword searchable, which is huge. But yeah, for now, you can Google and find out, like, say, Mary Kay Waldvogel has a, she wrote a paper in one of the 1980s, probably 84, I think was one of them. And you could go in there and then you could find it. It's probably not in this one. Yep, it is. So in 1984, Mary Kay wrote Quilts in the WPA Milwaukee Handcraft Project, 1935 to 1943. And so I can go straight to that article. And I can also download it as a PDF. So this is really good stuff. And like I said, it does take time, but you can find stuff, and then these things then can point you in other directions, and that's research, and I'm not really going to touch on that a whole lot. But I think that's pretty much everything I wanted to say about the Quilt Index. I mean, there's lots of other great things in here. Resources, artists, stories. They're hooked up with a lot of the other entities. So the Quilt Alliance, the International Quilt Museum, they're AQSG. Everybody's kind of in cahoots, like in a good way, trying to share information for quilt scholarship and study. So we'll leave the Quilt Index. And I just found out about HathiTrust. I think I'm pronouncing this right, HathiTrust. It is a database of interesting things. I have not had a chance to really explore this yet. But what I do know is you can't download anything in here unless you are connected with a member library. And I got excited about that for a minute because I was like, oh, my local library. Sometimes your local library gets you access. In this case, it looked like all of the member libraries are actually like university and college libraries. But that doesn't stop you from looking at these things. You just can't download a PDF version of it. So the first thing on here, the Bogey Book, 1925 by Denison's. Denison's was or I guess still is, like office supplies kind of stuff. So I thought this was so fun. Look at this. It's like from the 20s. It's, okay, why is that? I don't know why it did that. Out. Well, for some reason it's turning it blue. I don't know why. But I mean, look at this. This is so much fun. Halloween, harvest time, and Thanksgiving. It's all of these crafts and things. What fun. And I think it will let you download one page. But you can't download the whole book without, being part of a member library. But look at that. I mean, how fun. And this was just on the front page. I didn't even search for this. So somebody did recommend that you can search, say, for quilts, certain types of quilts. There might be something in here. Yeah. So look at okay. So Quilt Journal, the Kentucky Quilt Project. Well, you can also find that on the Quilt Index. Yeah. Quilts, Their Story and How to Make Them, the Marie Webster book. Yeah. So just like all kinds of stuff. I haven't had a chance to really look at this yet, but artistry and quilts. And then, like you'll find The Crazy Quilt Murders by H.W. Sandberg. Well, we're going to have to find out about that. And it's 1938. So also, okay. So anyway, this one looks really promising as just having some interesting things. This reminds me a lot of the Internet Archive. And I didn't pull up the Internet Archive because I know it's had some issues. But the Internet Archive remains a good place to look for stuff. Mostly books and publications like that. So next, and I was going to put the Hathi. It's actually just hathitrust.org. It's their website. Okay, so then I thought I would go to one who is local to me, and this is the Maryland Center for History and Culture, and they've had a big push to put a lot of their things online. And I have never actually, so I've searched in their library. I have not searched the museum collections. So I thought, well, let's do that together because I've never done this before. So typically when I go to a museum website, I pretty much always want to search the collections. Every now and then I'm looking for like an existing exhibit or a past exhibit. Most of the time I go, oh, by the way, that was Thomas Kincaid. Most of the time I'm specifically want to look at their collections. So usually it's somewhere. Sometimes you might have to go to the site map, but you'll find their collections are usually pretty obvious. And let's see. So they have a variety of different collections here. Okay, so the H. Furlong Baldwin Library is the one that I have used, that collection. And that libraries are always going to be separate from actual items. Libraries are for books, magazines, ephemera, scrapbooks, paper things. The regular collections are for all of the objects. And I have yet to find a place that doesn't separate them. So what they happen to have is they have things separated. So they've got works on paper, textiles, which is what we're going to look at, silver, ceramics, glass, sheet music. I mean, these are the things that they happen to have large collections of and that they specialize in. Obviously, other museums are going to be different. Ooh, fashion archives. I didn't know they had that. Yeah, ephemera, 3D objects. Apparently they have a UB Blake piano or organ. Okay, so let's look at textiles. And this one should be lots of goodness for us because they happen to have a lot of quilts. So this includes the world's largest collection of Baltimore album quilts, samplers and embroideries, bed and table linens, and a collection of important banners and flags. So how do we look at this one? Fashion archives. Okay, digital collections. And yeah, it's pretty much automatically going to come up with textiles because that's most of what they have are these quilts and this looks like all that they have online then is 2 pages. But imagine that this was, say, the Smithsonian, and they have, hundreds and hundreds of quilts, and then also other kinds of textiles. Well, if I wanted to filter this, I could search, or I can look at what is here? Well, I only want to look at the quilts, or I want to only look at the flags, or I want to look at the samplers. So, they'll have search parameters like that that'll help you sometimes, usually. But when in doubt, you can do your keyword search. So that takes us down to 43 items. So I have to say their search is pretty good. It's pretty quick. Yeah, very quickly I'm like looking through here. Wait a minute. Oh my God, you guys. Okay, this is amazing. I've been looking. Do you know how long I've been looking for this quilt? This is the Rachel Meyer Walter quilt that I have been looking for. I have a picture of it that's in Dr. Dunton's scrapbooks, and it was right here all along. Isn't that crazy? Okay. Well, now you're looking at a quilt that I am very, very interested in. And I have, so far, I have patterned this block. This bizarre squirrel with lots of strawberries. I patterned that block, and I've stitched it. And I'm working on putting the little green things on the strawberries. It will take me forever because there's like 40 of them. And I can't remember. I think there's more than that in this. I only made 40 for mine. Anyway. Well, look at that. That was kind of fun to run into a quilt I was not expecting to see. Now I got to remember it's there. But yeah, I know I've seen a number of these quilts have been on exhibit, but that one was not. That's wild. I actually saw this one recently. This one was part of an exhibit recently. Okay. So the Maryland Center for History and Culture, they make it pretty easy. And one I learned about recently was the Indiana State Museum of Historic Sites. They have a lot of quilts. Not every museum has quilts. Some you will be very disappointed by. They actually have a whole quilts and textiles collection that they separate out. And I'm trying to remember this one. Okay, start exploring. This one, it wasn't as easy. The browse the collections there in the middle. I just like it when it's right on the top, right? That makes the most sense. So this one I think makes the most sense to search. Yeah. And then you have your standard advanced search, just like we found on the quilt index. And I'm just going to go quilt. So this one, oh gosh, they've got all kinds of stuff. Actual quilts, quilt show ribbon, if quilts could talk address book. Yeah, these are interesting. Now, they have something really fun I will show you. Let's see. I'll do bicentennial. Because I know they have bicentennial objects, because when I was looking at quilts, I ran into their bicentennial stuff by accident. This is not searching for some reason. There we go. Okay. So here we go. There's a bicentennial banner. Does that not look familiar? Looks just like a quilt we saw. Bicentennial canning jars, also a thing. This was fun. I have this bookmarked. This is a bicentennial dress. I mean, can you just feel the polyester in that dress? So fun. But what else is in here that I know I saw is this. The Bicentennial Star Applique Crib Quilt. Now these itty bitty little rounded corner stars in here are super difficult. And if this is the one I'm remembering correctly, yes. So this was made by Mary Kay Horn. And it's described as a bicentennial red, white, and blue polyester and cotton crib quilt made from a Mountain Mist Stearns & Foster's kit issued in '76. The white background is printed in light blue with the design to be appliqued as well as the quilting pattern. So if you've seen kit quilts, you know this is what they look like. The official red, white, and blue striped bicentennial star design is appliqued in the center of a white star with red and blue applique triangles defining the star shape. Similar red and blue triangles form paired squares positioned between the blocks. The outer border is plain red, and 8-pointed diamond stars quilted in the plain white areas. The quilting is by hand at 7 to 8 stitches per inch in white thread through a medium bat. The back is 2 sections of unbleached cotton muslin, and the quilt is bound in red with mitered corners. And then it references the photo sheet and extra fabric pieces. So there is a separate collection entry for their extra fabric pieces. And so this is what Mary Horn says. Mary K. Horn says. So Indiana, Marion County, Indianapolis. The donor, Mary K. Horn, made the quilt between 1995 and 2011 from a kit given to her by Jane Hodge, who purchased it in 76. So this kit was not made in the 70s. It sat around until 95. The quilt was very difficult because it was not designed by a quilter. And this happens a lot, believe it or not. The polyester cotton fabrics fray badly, and the curved point star had to be cut from tiny pieces of 3 different colors of this fabric and appliqued. The triangles giving the appearance of piece blocks were also appliqued. So this is a really poorly designed quilt. And I love the fact that I don't have to go search this kit out to find out all of this data. This is such good information. And let's see if we can find the pieces. They're probably right after this. Okay, here's another one. Or no, this is the flyer. I'm sorry. This is the flyer for that quilt. There is another bicentennial quilt that I actually have the kit for, and it's similar. So I'm thinking it's the exact same problems. But this is the flyer that came with that quilt kit, and so she's got all this information. It's pretty much the same information, I think. And then, where are the fabric pieces? There's another bicentennial quilt. I think there's 3 or 4 bicentennial quilts in here. Well, now, of course, the fabric pieces aren't going to come up. Here we go. Printed fabric for bicentennial star crib quilt. And these are just some random pieces. And you could kind of, I don't know if this is coming through very well for you guys, but it's kind of, you can kind of see the printing on them. But, if I didn't have access to a kit like this and I wasn't sure, what things looked like, this is so incredible that they have done this, that they've scanned these items and then they've put this narrative in there. So I just learned about Indiana State Museum the other day, and in your travels, you learn about museums that just happen to have a lot of quilts or happen to have a lot of one type of thing. And so they're really great for just, make a note when you have time, go look and see what it is. Okay. And second to last. So we have the Michigan State Museum, and I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time here because Jill and I think, are going to do more with this, because we have discovered that the Michigan State Museum, Michigan State University Museum, has so many quilts, and they have every indigenous quilt that's not in the collection, a private collection of an indigenous person. I feel like they have every quilt there is. So let's see. Oh, I can't. How do I spell indigenous? Indigenous. Is that right? Okay. So this is all kinds of stuff. So then I would want quilt. And here we go. So many of these quilts are in the book we're reading. I was like, oh my God, they've got everything. Okay, so Coyote Creates the Night Sky is actually one that I really love. So we'll look at that one. Yeah, and just like the Quilt Index, just like Indiana State, just like Maryland Center for History and Culture, okay, and they have low res pictures, apparently. And this is one of the unfortunate things about some of these databases. You can get high resolution pictures, but you have to contact them. And depending on what you want to use those pictures for, you might end up, it might end up being, you might have to pay a fee. You typically, when it's for educational purposes, they'll let you have it for free as long as you, give the citation. That's where you got the picture from. But many of them, like this is about as big. Three Little Pigs quilt. There actually is a really great Three Little Pigs quilt. It's a Ruby McKim. And I say great in that it's a bizarre Three Little Pigs quilt. The wolf is very strange. This wolf is pretty, well, I mean, this is a coyote, but this guy is kind of cool looking. But yeah, the Three Little Pigs quilt, I'm familiar with, is kind of creepy. But it's really great. It's look it up if you're not familiar with it. I'm positive it's on the Quilt Index. But anyway, I mean, this was exciting. And like I said, this is the book. If you're not following along with us, it's To Honor and Comfort. And it's written and compiled by Marcia McDowell and her husband, Kurt Dewhurst. And, they must have spent a lot of time at Michigan State because there's a lot of the quilts that are in that book are here. Okay, so the last one is one I recently ran across, and this one's not specific to quilts and textiles, but I think it's a really interesting resource. And it's the American Craft Council fairly recently created an open access library and archive. And so, there's stuff in here that's really specific to the American Craft Council, like what you're seeing here, which is like their conferences and exhibitions and things. But, there's stuff in here, Friends of Fiber Art International Artist Files. I mean, that, who knows? Michigan or Minnesota Crafts Council, there could be something in there. You never know. So let's see, let's browse. So, SNAG, that's the Society of North American Goldsmiths. Some of these things, I mean, who knows? Jewelry, who knows? Untitled sculptural object. There's just a lot of stuff in here. This seems to be a little bit more of like maybe a little bit harder to navigate, maybe. Let's see. They have textile fiber. Yeah, they don't have as much that I was really hoping to see, but let's see. Let's go to fiber. I lost it. Where'd it go? There it is. The 1,600 pieces in fiber. And some of these things are pictures. Installation of Swarple. Let's see. This might actually be a quilt. No, this looks like a mixed media. These are all mixed media. These look like they're woven. But yeah, this is some place where, depending on the nature of research or whatever you're looking for, you might find something in here that's, going to be relevant. Let's see. I weave software. This is it's a woven apron or overalls. Yeah. So it's a tapestry weaving. Yeah. So interesting stuff. I think it's worth keeping a list of all of the possible places that you can find information. And I've been trying to compile, and I've not done a great job of it. Like I said, I've sort of been throwing it into my little Pocket app, or, just creating a list of web links. But I think it's worthwhile, depending on if you do research, what kind of research you do, what you're looking for, just to, create some kind of list for yourself to, the places that you go back to again and again, and new places that you want to check for things. So I hope that was helpful and not super boring. I know sometimes it's kind of like dull to watch somebody like navigate online, but it's also useful if, if you're not used to searching, or, if your experience is just plugging something into Google, searching databases is not quite as easy. You have to use a little bit more creativity and a little bit more like, like a detective work is probably the best way I can put it. That sometimes it's going to be, it's there. It's just going to be like, you have to dig a little bit. Libraries, for those of us of a certain age, we remember the Dewey Decimal System. That, I think, is a perfect explanation of the concept of looking into databases. Yeah. Oh, hey, Kenny. Select from quilts, wear type, whatever I'm looking for. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, if you think about, like, if you go to the library and you're like, you don't know what kind of book you're looking for, but you know what the topic is, like, I'm going to go look for books under quilting. Well, many of us will remember our childhood and high school days where you're like, all right, quilting, it's crafts, it's textiles, it's quilts. Like, you just go to the bookstore. Where do quilts show up? They show up in crafts and hobbies. And pretty much everything about quilts is going to be there, even though there might be a book that's about the history of quilts. That's still going to be craft. So there's the kind of things where you have to think like, well, I can search the history books in the library or the bookstore, but I've mostly found quilt books in hobbies. Crafts and hobbies. So, it's just knowing those kind of things. And if you don't find what you're looking for in one place, look somewhere else, because it doesn't mean it doesn't exist or it's not there. It's just, there's a method to the madness of how things are filed. So, all right. Are we ready for some Sarah Josepha Hale? I feel like, I said I wasn't going to mention the election, and I'm really not. But I think about some of the nonsense that I see on TV and on the internet, and I think, you know what we need right about now, y'all? We need Sarah Josepha Hale. I feel like I missed my chance on Halloween to resurrect her, or Dia de los Muertos, to resurrect her. Like, Sarah, come to us. We need to have a seance for Sarah, because she was no nonsense. She was smart. She knew what she was doing. We seem to have a dearth of that these days. All right. So, as a reminder, we are reading The Lady of Godey's, Sarah Josepha Hale, by Ruth Finley. And you guys, we are really almost done. We only have 3 chapters left. I think this one is fairly short. The next one is really long. That's the one about Mary Had a Little Lamb, and I can't even imagine what is making that chapter so long. And so this is interesting. I will show you this before we get started. You'll see this again. I'll show you this again before we finish. But so if we remember way back in the beginning, let me find it. We had a picture of Sarah. She's an attractive lady. So this is a picture. This does not have a date, but I think, she's fairly young in this picture. So this is the picture of Sarah that we saw at the very beginning. Nice looking lady, right? And then we have Sarah at the end of her life. Still a nice looking lady. I think that's cool, that we can see her at kind of both ends of her career. And knowing that she did live a long, prosperous life, and when I say prosperous, not earning money, but prosperous in terms of she did so much stuff. I still think she makes me feel bad about myself, because like in a lifetime, I will not do all of the things that she did, say, on a Tuesday. So the chapter today is chapter 16, and it's called A Female Writer. And again, as a reminder, we are reading The Lady of Godey's, Sarah Josepha Hale, by Ruth Finley, and it was written in 1931. Chapter 16, A Female Writer. Get a little sip. Okay. Of the many poems written by Sarah Hale, only a few are remembered. These few, however, have become part and parcel of American ballad tradition, so much so that scarcely anyone ever asks the name of the author. And at this point, you don't ask, and you don't even bother to know. What modern stops to wonder who wrote If Ever I See, Our Father in Heaven, It Snows, I don't know any of those, Mary Had a Little Lamb. Even though for the past few years the authorship of the last named verses has been figuring somewhat in the news. This consigning of a creator to oblivion, the while his creation endures in full flush of appeal, is, in a true sense, the highest compliment posterity pays an artist, a compliment won by some through works of exceeding beauty. How many persons can reply offhand to the question, who painted Mona Lisa? The exquisite lady whose inscrutable smile has become proverbial. Well, I think most of us know that was Da Vinci. Sarah Hale won the compliment with a handful of nursery rhymes. Mrs. Hale has been dead for half a century. Again, remember, this is 1931. The magazine she edited so long has passed with the needs of yesterday. All the many books she wrote are out of print. No attempt was ever made to collect the great mass of her prose and verse that lies scattered, not only through 50 years of the Lady's Book, but in scores of other publications, the dailies, weeklies, monthlies, and annuals of her era. Effort now to assemble her magazine and newspaper contributions, were there a point to the undertaking, would be doomed to failure. For as she said in Woman's Record, her writings often were printed unsigned, in accordance with the haphazard custom of the day. Even in the Lady's Book, where she was careful to credit the work of others, many an article, story, and poem of her own was printed anonymously. At other times, she was content with the initials SJH, or simply the editor. Now, I would venture to guess this is no longer true. My guess is there's someplace out there that has all the Godey's Ladies books and have probably, somehow identified or, made good guesses about even the anonymous articles, if they were written by her or not. So I'm thinking since 1931, probably done a better job of figuring out what Sarah Hale wrote and not. So, hi, Trisha. Welcome. I'm glad to see you. We are reading The Lady of Godey's. Okay. Enormous was her output. Now it survives only in its original printing, all except a poem or two written with modest simplicity for grown-ups, and a handful of little lilting rhymes for children, rhymes that almost sing themselves. These, remaining dear to each succeeding generation, have been reprinted 1,000 times, in schoolbook after schoolbook, in anthologies without end, even unto now. But fundamentally, Sarah Hale was an editor, not a writer. She wrote, to be sure, wrote without ceasing, but as an editor writes, for the day. Almost from the outset, her prose showed a strong journalistic bent, reason of itself why none of it survives. In addition, it was marred by many of the stilted mannerisms of the 18th century. I mean, let's not, sling insults here, Ruth Finley. Your writing is also quite stilted and weird. For, though as an editor she came to inveigh against prolixity, oh my God, it was her own worst fault for many years. Never did she wholly overcome a fondness for big words and involved sentences. My God, this is the pot calling the kettle black, Ruth Finley. I mean, you just wrote a sentence that had inveigh and prolixity in it. And you want to talk about Sarah Hale? Come on now. It will be remembered that in the autobiographical sketch telling of her hours of study with her husband, she confessed that her early predilection was for the pompous words and sounding periods of Johnson, the sublime flights and glittering fancies of Counselor Phillips, and that her husband labored to persuade her that these models of her girlhood study were sublime nonsense. Only her first prose, Northwood, shows full results of his teachings. Written unhurriedly and with apparent care, its style departs farther from Addisonian standards than does that of her later writings. Had financial necessity not sidetracked her into the exacting time limits set on editorial work, she might well have developed a thoroughly readable style. For the praise accorded Northwood by contemporary critics was deserved. It displays not only a command of pure idiomatic English, but a structural aptitude, especially in the combining of narrative and dialogue, that up to that point had characterized only one American, James Fenimore Cooper. That's interesting. That Ruth Finley's going to compare Sarah Hale to James Fenimore Cooper. However, when confronted with the imperative rush of getting a magazine out on time, she unconsciously dropped back into emulation of the diligently studied writers of her youth. From then on, for years, her prose was ponderously Georgian, filled with sounding periods, though happily devoid of glittering fancies. Against the latter, her husband's warning must have been most emphatic, since never did she indulge in the sublime flights so dear to tongue as well as pen throughout the 1800s. Herein, the 19th century outdid its predecessor. But with the rest of the Victorians, she was guilty of stodginess and shared even their conviction that the one sure way to be impressive was to call on God. Following the line of least resistance, she too threw the heft of the rhetorical burden on the Almighty. For this, she should not be too harshly criticized. She was, in fact, a deeply religious woman, a devout Episcopalian, and so truly a Christian that she came closer to loving her neighbor as herself than is vouchsafed to most humans. Besides, everybody called on God, from preachers to politicians. Anyone wading through old congressional records is puzzled indeed to know whether it was sermons or speeches then being delivered in the country's lawmaking hills. This is good stuff. Even as late as the turns of the century, Bryan's cohorts agitated free silver in the name of the Lord, while Republican orators assured voters that William McKinley and heaven would fill all dinner pails. These indiscriminate references to deity, in season and out, indicated neither conscious sanctity nor unconscious blasphemy. It was a fashionable rhetorical habit, and that was all. Turning out numerous annuals, 2 anthologies, cookbooks, translations, and much verse, in addition to editing Godey's, Mrs. Hale had little time during the 40s and 50s for finished writing. But about 1860, her style changed for the second time, becoming more straightforward and thereafter reproducing much of the vivid quality of the earlier Northwood. Now, you guys, I still have not at this point looked up Northwood to see, like, what is it really about? I feel like that, if I'm remembering correctly, maybe you guys remember better than I do, but I feel like at the beginning of the book, they kind of insinuated that it kind of had an abolitionist bent, but I truly am not remembering what it's about, and I still haven't looked it up. Not solely because it exemplifies the happiest prose style of its author is Northwood interesting. Well, I guess maybe it's going to tell us now. She's going to remind us. Published in 1827, it was one of America's first attempts at novel writing, and as such has been accorded far less attention by literary historians than it deserves. Charles Brockden Brown had offered the public his essay-like fiction from 1798 until his death in 1810. William Wirt had published The British Spy in 1800, and by 1821, Cooper with The Spy as well on his literary career. But this was about the sum total of American novel-length fiction. Northwood has 3 other claims to fame. It was the first American novel of consequence written by a woman. It was the first novel by either man or woman to deal with the question of slavery. Okay, so yes, it did have an abolitionist theme to it. It is the most accurate and detailed picture of the domestic habits, customs, and manners of the post-colonial period contemporaneously recorded. Okay. I mean, maybe it's worth a read to find out what the Georgian period was like. In the last respect, the author, being a potential editor, knew precisely what she was doing. Her eye on the century hence, with this unpretending book may be a reference. When this unpretending book may be a reference. She went into such minutiae as the color of decorative paint, coffee and toast for breakfast, and the correct apparel for bridesmen at weddings. So I think this actually sounds like an interesting book. Maybe one day we'll read it. While dealing primarily with the problem of emancipation, Northwood displayed a range of interests as wide as the activities of its time. Nor did it stop there. Repeatedly, it anticipated attitudes more characteristic of the 20th than the 19th century. That is interesting. Into the mouths of her characters, the author put her own ideas on education, feminism, child training, sumptuary laws, industrialism, immigration, centralized government, international relations. Maybe we should read Northwood. You know what? If the quilters and the textile people and the people who sew are going to fix the world, which I'm really at this point thoroughly convinced we're the only ones who can do it, maybe we should read Northwood. Because honestly, like I know you guys, I say this over and over and over again. Sarah Hale, I'm sure she would be knocked dead by a smartphone. I mean, the anachronisms would blow her mind. But I think that, like, from a social standpoint, she would be perfectly fine in today's day and age. She would be right there with the rest of us, you know, with the feminists, railing against, you know, all of it. And I really think, I think she really is the kind of person who could, like, get to know her surroundings and then, like, snap right into all of these ideas she had. And a lot of them were quite good considering, right? She foresaw, well, other than that part about, I think, women in education needing to learn domestic skills. Domestic skills are good to know, but I don't know that your advanced education needs to be in domestic skills. I think high school home economics is really good and perfectly fine. She foresaw the United States as a world power and as such extending association to Great Britain. This last, a rather amazing conception in view of the animosity then still fostered between the lately severed countries. So, I mean, she had this vision. She knew that, like, Great Britain wasn't going to be an enemy forever. But Mrs. Hale had a faculty for stripping facts of emotions as well as for taking into account those natural laws which in the final analysis so inexorably govern. In Blood of Race, she sensed the functioning of one of these laws, and so, though born out of the prejudices of the Revolution, she could yet look for an inevitable drawing together of the two great Anglo-Saxon nations for the protection of their common institutions, liberties, and culture. Great Britain once called herself our mother, she caused a Northwood character to say, and though far from being an indulgent one, we do not deny her maternity. But there is a period when nations, as well as individuals, quit their minority, and if the parent country would continue the parallel of relationship which subsists in families, she will not consider her independent offspring as her natural enemy. And we do not see instances where the mother finds not only a useful friend in the child she once discarded, but a support in age, one who will afford an asylum when no other protector is to be found. When Alexander sacked Tyre, the Carthaginians conveyed many of the Tyrians to a place of safety. They remembered they were descendants of a Tyrian colony, and will Great Britain be exempted from the operation of those universal laws of nature which have governed all created things on this globe and their works? The nations of Europe will band against her, for she has trampled them down in her day of triumph, and she has the light of freedom which tyrants hate. The nations will gather against her, and she will be sore beset. And then will America remember. America remembered on the 6th of April, 1917, 90 years after Northwood was written. And if I'm correct, if I'm not wrong, the 6th of April, 1917 this is when we entered World War I. That's kind of a wild guess, but I think I might be right. There is much wisdom to be gleaned from this early American novel. The woman who wrote it, inexperienced as she then was, had done some exceptionally clear thinking. She was really young when she wrote this book, too. You know, she was a young mother. She had 5 children. Now I'm drawing a complete blank if she wrote it before her husband died. I'm drawing a blank. But she knew, for instance, that the art of self-government is indispensable to women's felicity. She had learned that persons who dare not commune with their own hearts are not only dependent on society for their pleasures, but must seek it as a refuge from anxiety and remorse. She faced poverty for herself and children fearlessly because she had already observed that excessive luxury and rational liberty were never yet found compatible. Though the complacent artificiality of Victorianism was to cozen most people, she had long viewed selflessness as an insidious passion, mingling itself with motives and inspiring actions which claimed to proceed from holy and benevolent feelings. So let's see, First World War, 28th July 1914 to 11th November 1918. Okay, so it was 1917 when we entered the war. I feel like we were in for a while, but I mean, does a year and a half make sense? Because it's America remembered on the 6th of April, 1917. Okay. And above all, she held to the following. There can be no excellency attained without industry. The mind of the idle, like the garden of the slothful, will be overgrown with briars and weeds. And indolence, under whatever fashionable name, is a more dangerous enemy to practical goodness and to moral and intellectual improvement than even dissipation. Those who tread a devious path may possibly retrace their steps, or by a circuitous route finally reach the goal. But those who never stir, how can they win the race? Ah, okay. So I was right. She stirred. And if for herself she avoided devious paths, she retained nonetheless enough of 18th century broad-mindedness to keep her charitable in the midst of obduracy. Oh, the big words. The big words. Charitable enough to set genius above weakness, befriending such men as Dr. William Morton and Edgar Allan Poe. But Northwood is far from a dry and didactic volume. It contains many a sly dig that even yet brings a smile. Who could help chuckling over the sentence? You may easily tell a rich Yankee farmer. He is always pleading poverty. Oh, you rascal, Sarah Hale. Mrs. Hale had the keenly observant mind of the true journalist. Hers was that sensitivity which registers both the little and the big, the homely human interest of every day on the one hand, and on the other the wider events of social import. So that, while she could wax editorially enthusiastic over the trim of a bonnet, it was never all chit-chat with the magazines she edited. At the time, when there was little dissemination of news and smaller interpretation of it, she subjected public affairs to a running fire of comment, not only as these affected women and the home, but in respect to the big thing she called our American experiment. Now that's interesting. How often recently have you heard people refer to the American experiment, the democratic experiment? I've heard this a number of times more recently, and of course it's usually in terms that are less than good. But that's interesting. Now I'm wondering, did she coin that? Did she coin that phrase? I mean, just because she used the term doesn't mean she invented it, but that's very interesting. Okay. In an age when public prints dealt most effectively with trivialities, she was acutely conscious of movements and trends. Witness her early sensing of the menace of slavery. She searched for the meaning of events, trying always to calculate what they might portend. An editor's greatest gift, appreciation of the significance of facts, was hers. Thus she found sending Eliza Leslie to Niagara Falls in pursuit of a descriptive story with which to bait the reader by amusing him, which she herself sat at her desk attempting to figure out just how important steam as applied to overland transportation was likely to prove, how it would affect the growth of the country commercially, what relation it was going to have to education and the home. Illustrative of the journalistic aptitude of Sarah Hale is her book of essays, Traits of American Life, published in 1835. The following selections have been culled at random. So here's the first one. To speak without metaphor, the engrossing pursuit of Americans is wealth. What in the rising man was industry and economy becomes in the rich man parsimony and avarice. Any man who has money may obtain the reputation of taste by the mere purchasing of works of art. Political controversies are never entered into without any wish to gain knowledge, but only a triumph for the party. Like I said, Sarah Hale would do just fine today. We shall never be free in spirit, while bigotry and intolerance are cherished among us. Y'all. Oh my gosh. Sarah Hale. Seriously, let's just do the seance now. Let's just resurrect her. Americans have two ardent passions, the love of liberty and the love of distinction. Few individuals enter into public life who would not be wealthier and happier as private citizens, but then they would not be known and would not see their names in the newspaper, except for raising a curious calf or a mammoth cabbage. There is small danger of being starved in our land of plenty, but the danger of being stuffed is imminent. Oh my gosh. I mean, holy Moses. This is stuff that's very prescient. This is a speculating and selfish age, and to think money will answer all things is too much the characteristic of Americans. God of my country, is there no word of power that can exorcise this demon from among us? We are aware that a certain class of political economists affect to believe that luxury is beneficial to a nation, but it is not so. The same reasoning which would make extravagance in dress commendable because it employed manufacturers and artists would also make intemperance a virtue in those who could afford to be drunk, because the preparation of the alcohol employs laborers and the consumption would encourage trade. The glories of conquests and the luxuries of wealth alike tend to make the few masters and the many slaves. As a good journalist must, she spoke her mind, did Sarah Hale, but seldom did she preach. She was not a Puritan. Unbelievable as it may seem in the 20th century that any one Victorian in point of time could be otherwise. So let's look at this plate before we go on. So this says this is a characteristic example of Godey's many fancy embellishments. So this is from 1852. This almost looks like it could be like the front cover of the book. It's a pretty lovely engraving, but then it's got this kind of fancy stuff around it that makes me think that it might be like the cover of the book, or I don't know, maybe I don't know what they call the frontispiece. Okay. As she wrote Matthew Vassar, she did not believe in sumptuary laws. She had faith in the midst of Victorianism's most pedantic and reactionary mandates that right conditions could create uprightness of mind, body, and heart. Possessing the editor's knowledge that there are two sides to every question, she was liberal to a degree uncharacteristic of her times. I cannot tolerate anything better than the puritanical zeal which exalts itself at the expense of every social virtue and innocent enjoyment, are words spoken by a character in Northwood. The author of Northwood made those words a precept of her editorial life. The tolerance of Mrs. Hale is well exemplified in her books on etiquette. She wrote several. Coming out of a social order that stressed recreative restraint, they are unique. She devoted whole chapters to games, dancing, and like frivolities. Especially did she go to lengths to devise Happy Sundays for Children, as she entitled one chapter, wherein she said the following: "There is something monstrous in linking Sunday and sadness in the brain of a child. We all teach our children and hold for ourselves that Sunday is a day of rest. So it is. But upon this subject, it seems to me there is a mistaken view. The word rest implies not idleness or tedious vacuity of thought, but a rest from the wearying secular cares of earth and from physical toil. We are far from meaning that the day should not be marked to children as something distinct from other days, but let it be by linking holiness with happiness, by changing their amusements and not annihilating them." Fully aware of the war then waging between Jacksonian scorn of form and manner and Victorian worship of them, she had as little use for one extreme as for the other. Yet for all his bluff disdain, the Democrat, she suspected, was the more worth saving. So her appeal here was to sincerity. while other social arbiters were concerned over such momentous questions as whether a genteel female should insist upon a gentleman's wholly restraining himself in demonstrations of affection, Mrs. Hale was insisting on essentials. Rules of courtesy are necessary in every family and for all stations of life in our country, because here all have a chance for improvement. The first mark of a well-bred person is a sensitive regard for the feelings of others. The first indispensable requisite of good society is education. The most welcome guest in society will ever be the one to whose mind everything is a suggestion and whose words suggest something to everybody. Society appears to impose on its members a number of arbitrary rules which continually restrict them in their actions. It tells them how they must eat and drink and dress and walk and talk and so on. But if the ordinances of society are examined, it will be found that they all tend to one end, the preservation of harmony and the prevention of one person from usurping the rights or intruding on the province of another. I can agree with that. These sayings are quoted from Mrs. Hale's most popular book on etiquette, Manners or Happy Homes and Good Society All the Year Round. Good Society All the Year Round. It ran through many editions, and while it fully explained why one should eat with a fork instead of a knife, its real object was to convince a sprawling pioneer of America that a certain formality of manner or etiquette, as it is usually called, is both a mark of respect for others and of one's own self-respect, and that correct conduct is predicated on right feeling. But more important than manner to Sarah Hale was achievement. Of all her prose works, the one she considered most important was Woman's Record, or Sketches of All Distinguished Women from the Beginning till A.D. 1850. Arranged in 4 eras, with selections from female writers of every age, illustrated by 230 portraits engraved on wood by Lossing and Barrett. It was first published in 1853. The thing is stupendous. It begins with Abigail, wife of King David of Israel, and ends with a list of contemporary women laboring with their husbands in foreign mission fields. The index contains more than 2,000 names. The purpose of the undertaking was, as usual with the lady editor, the glorification of women. Most enthusiastically received, Women's Record was considered a standard work for many years. It still has value in that it is the only compilation including the name of every American woman who had the slightest claim to fame prior to 1850. Wow. Okay, this is interesting. So obviously, the Woman's Record only goes up to 1850, of course. But I wonder, if you look at works by, so like Judy Chicago, she did that like huge project dinner party, and within it she pinpointed like I don't know how many women, I mean it's a lot of them, over millennia. I'm wondering how many of them overlap with Sarah Hale. That would be an interesting little afternoon project one day to get this, see if we get a copy of this book, Women's Record, or something that lists the women, and then compare them against like Judy Chicago's work and other artists who have done work recognizing women. A fun little project. A biographical sketch of Mrs. Hale herself appears along with the rest. It quotes, however, from her verse only, for as she naively pointed out, sufficient specimens of my prose will be extant in this work. Of the poems she selected, only one is remembered today, It Snows. First printed in the Lady's Book for January 1837 and gaining an immediate popularity. It was reprinted in many journals and in various annuals and almanacs. It became a favorite piece in McGuffey's Fifth Reader. So we will be reading it. The first of its 5 stanzas reads as follows. It snows, cries the schoolboy, hurrah! And his shout is ringing through parlor and hall. While swift as the wing of a swallow, he's out, and his playmates have answered his call. It makes the heart leap but to witness their joy. Proud wealth has no pleasures, I trow, like the rapture that throbs in the pulse of a boy, and he gathers his treasures of snow. Then lay not the trappings of gold on thine heirs, while health and the riches of nature are theirs. In truth, Mrs. Hale rather fancied herself a versifier. A versifier. And time has not wholly gainsaid her, but as against the few of her rhymes that have survived, literally reams of them have perished. Yet to her day she was widely acclaimed as a poetess. It was a rhythmical age. People loved the measured sound of iambic and trochee feet. Trochee? Yeah, trochee feet, wholly aside from content. So it was the rhythm of the poem, I guess, that's more important than like what it's actually about. Yeah, versifier, I like that. Is that like auto-tune? To the primitive taste of a mass mind that possessed no criteria of its own, any verse, if only it held an ear-tickling swing, was satisfying. Rhyme and meter were the jazz of Victorianism. Writers sat up nights evolving new forms, new rhythms to attract even so great a poet as Poe, catering to his rub-a-dub public. He says the following: keeping time, in a sort of runic rhyme, to the tintinnabulation that so musically wells from the bells, 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 from the jingling and the tinkling of the bells. Poe did it supremely, of course. So did Longfellow, who, discarding the accepted form of blank verse, as in the Song of Hiawatha and Evangeline, managed without rhymes to endow old cadences borrowed from the ancient Greek with modern charm. While some of the best American poetry was written between 1830 and 1880, okay, Ruth, it is also true that during that span of 50 years, more metered trash was published. More metered trash was published in this country than ever before had been recorded in all the history of the ages. You know, Ruth has such nasty things to say about the Victorian era. Every crossroad boasted a local poet or half a dozen poetesses. The latter, in particular, inundated press and public with their blurblings. Small was their grammar, though no fault of their own, and consequently poetic license was requisitioned to cover a multitude of rather elementary lacks. So my guess is, these horrible poetesses were probably making quilts with 20,000 pieces in them. That's all they do, is write bad poems and waste their time on many-pieced quilts. Oh my goodness. Anyway, to jingle was the thing, so jingle they did, these crossroad poets, male and female. As for the poetesses, had not most of them been presented by friends and admirers with gold pens, especially destined for literary purposes? And was it not obligatory that they so use them? I guess just because you got a gold pen doesn't mean you can write. From about 1840 on, the book carried advertisements that read like this: Raps gold pens, goose quill size $2, swan quill sized $2.50, condor quill sized $5 without holders. Oh my god. Okay, so like a goose quill is like what got yay long, a swan quill, a condor a $5 condor quill pen. We gotta find that. What repository might we find a condor quill pen in? I don't know if Kenny's still here. I know Kenny likes fountain pens. Maybe we can get down and dirty with some pen people and find out if there are condor quill pens. Traditionally, pens were sized according to these standards until close to the year of the centennial. The holders that were extra, bone, onyx, silver, pearl, ivory, gold, are not so long gone out of general use, but that even yet one is occasionally seen. Condor quill, yeah. Of course, Mrs. Hale, who started life with a mere goose quill, acquired a gold pen. Did she not in Godey's for April 1845 print, The Gold Pen, a poem? Oh, Trisha, longer is better. Oh, goodness. The gold pen, a poem inscribed to the gentleman who presented the gift, and signed same with her full name, a most unusual indulgence in her own magazine. She certainly did, but even so, she was not one of the jinglers. So I'm curious to know, I wonder who gave her that pen. Maybe it was Matthew Vassar. Neither was she a poet in the true sense. Her work in the rhythmical medium of her period resulted in verse, not poetry, some of it very good. All of it was better than the average of the bulk then being produced, though none of it equaled the best. In any case, she possessed not a little facility for manipulating form to produce pleasing effects, and, as it was the common habit of many rhymesters, she's a versifier and a rhymester, to copy any new and happy structural combination, much of her verse sounds familiar, as the result of its rhythm having been imitated by others, even though the actual words she wrote may have gained no lasting currency. A case in point is her Christmas hymn, first published in Godey's for February 1841, music by G. Kingsley. It had been composed for a children's festival. The first and last stanzas were, "Hail, hail, the happy morn, when Christ our Lord was born. Sound, sound, his praise, the Prince of righteousness. He came our world to bless, the glorious hymn of peace on earth to raise. Sound, sound, the loudest strain, let earth and sky and main the anthem raise. Father, thy love we bless, Savior, we ask thy peace, Spirit, we beg thy grace, when God we praise." So I'm wondering, like, what tune that was supposed to be. An old favorite, unblushingly borrowed without credit by many a vellum or plush-bound annual or gift book of 19th century vintage, originally appeared in Godey's for January 1850 under the New Hampshire-inspired title Our Granite Hills. It has been reprinted under a dozen different headings since. The opening stanza will suffice to recall it to mind. My guess is we will not recognize this at all. What glowing thoughts, what glorious themes to mountain tops belong. The law from Sinai's summit came, from Zion's sacred song. And genius on Parnassian heights his banner first unfurled, and from the seven-hilled city waved the sword that swayed the world. Then let us raise the hymn of praise, to us the hills are given, and mountain tops are altars set to lift the soul to heaven. Taste changes with the times, as Mrs. Hale herself suggested in the preface to her Dictionary of Poetical Quotations. Published in 1850, a revision of the work of one John F. Addington, done some 20 years before. After explaining that, as Addington antedated most of the modern poets, they were of necessity omitted from his compilation. She cited as further ground for the revision this: the old dramatic poets wrote according to their lights, and therefore Addington's selections were not always in accordance with the present standards of public taste. A truism even more pertinent now than then. The 19th century wrote according to its lights. New lights illuminate the new century. Rightly or wrongly, every year all but the very best of the old slips further into the background. It was Mrs. Hale's first slender books of children's songs, poems for our children, that contained the verses of hers, which, taking their place as nursery classics, have resisted time. The three best known are Mary's Lamb, Birds, and Prayer. McGuffey's second reader for 1857 used Birds as lesson 5, giving it a new title, The Bird's Nest, and adding a third stanza not appearing with the two originals printed. Mary's Lamb was lesson, XLVII, so that's... Is that 47? Is XLVII 47? We're going to say 47. I might be wrong. Prayer was used in the first 1836 edition of the second reader as lesson 62? 47. Okay. Hey, I remember my Roman numerals. So LXII would be 62, right? None was signed, of course. McGuffey's, like the almanacs, did not take the trouble to note authors' names, not until the dignity of the famous fifth reader was reached. There, It Snows was credited to Mrs. Hale. Birds, the first poem of Poems for Our Children, read originally as follows. If ever I see, on bush or tree, young birds in a pretty nest, I must not, in my play, steal the birds away to grieve their mother's breast. For mother, I know, would sorrow so, should I be stolen away. So I'll speak to the birds in my softest words, nor hurt them in my play. That's nice. Like, don't hurt the birds, little children. Prayer, the final poem of the little book, came to be included, it seems, in every 19th century collection of children's verse. And there is many a youngster even yet taught this easily memorized version of the Lord's Prayer. Oh, so this is a children's version of the Lord's Prayer. Our Father in heaven, we hallow thy name. May thy kingdom so holy on earth be the same. O give to us daily our portions of bread. It is from thy bounty that all must be fed. Forgive our transgressions and teach us to know that humble compassion that pardons each foe. Keep us from temptation, from weakness and sin, and thine be the glory forever. Amen. And that is that chapter. Now, lest we forget, Mary Had a Little Lamb is the subject of the next chapter, which is extremely long. So we will hit that one next week. And then we will be in the home stretch. We'll just have a few more pages to finish. This has been a very long book, but I think, hopefully I could speak for you guys too, it has been a very good book. I've learned so much about Sarah Hale, and I mean, I realized that this was a bit of a departure from, quilts and textiles, but, Ruth Finley having written a book about quilts, and the lady, the Godey's magazine being a ladies, magazine, I thought, yeah. So I'm pretty pleased with this one. I think this one, Avril Colby's book was a snooze fest. The MacIver, oh gosh, what's his last name? The Chintz book guy. He was interesting. Oh, bye, Druid. I'll talk to you soon. So anyway, I think this was a very good book, and I'm really glad that I got a copy of it. There is also a book about Godey's written by Carrie Hall, who, is one of the other major quilt writers. Although Carrie Hall did actually make quilts, so we can trust her more. But she also writes about Godey's, but her book is really more about the fashion, because it's called From Hoop Skirts to Nudity. So that one's definitely in the future, but I don't want to do those back to back. So now with that said, it is 4 p.m. my time. So I am going to let you guys go and get started on planning your Friday, because it is Friday Eve. I hope that my U.S. friends are not experiencing the election like being ground down that I am. I'm just so tired of election. And I'm so glad to spend some time with you guys today, just looking at quilt stuff and reading The Lady of Godey's, because I swear I'm going to throw the TV out the window, right? So, all right. You guys have a fantastic weekend. I will be back on Monday, 2 p.m. Eastern, as usual. Next week, let's see, Jill and I, on Tuesday night, Quilt Nerding on YouTube, we'll still be doing To Honor and Comfort. And then, am I looking at the calendar correctly? I think it's next Wednesday. Yes, next Wednesday, the 13th, we will be looking at crochet hooks, knitting needles, and tatting shuttles. Oh yes, Trisha, that's great. Yes, if Mama's on, we will definitely rate her. So yeah, I hopefully you'll join me and Jill next week for some fun and shenanigans. And like I said, I'll be back like normal on Monday. So yeah, let's do that. Let's raid Mama Let me find, if I can find my screen where I can write this. Okay. Well, you guys have a like I said, wonderful weekend, and thank you so much as always, you guys. I wouldn't be here without you. So, mwah. Oh gosh, why can I never type? And Twitch makes you type it right. Oh, what? Oh, I see what I did. Dang it. You know, guys, one day I will be able to type in the raid and have it work the first time. All right, there we go. So hopefully you guys will have some time to stick around for a little bit with Mama, and I will see you soon. Bye.
Stephanie Cake? Hi, my friend. Welcome in. Thank you so much for bringing your family here to see me today. Hi, Trisha. How are you, sweetheart? Oh my gosh, Stephanie Cake, what did you do today in your stream? Please tell me all the things. Raiders, for those of you that do not know me, I am Mama as a fan. I'm a quilter, and I generally attempt to give tutorials for both machine and hand piecing and quilting here on stream. Every single week, we're going to have a weekly topic that we discuss. Right? What you see behind me is 12 of the blocks that we discussed this year already. And during the week, I will show you how to piece the project by hand. I'll show you how to piece it by machine. And then we come together as a big family and figure out what we want to do for our final project for that week. So that's who I am. That's what I do. Raiders, if you could do me a favor. Underneath my stream window, you'll see a little round logo. Looks like a little quilt. Go ahead and double click that for me. What that does is it gets rid of a raid URL up above, and it'll make your view count for me, which is super important. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. You've been streaming at a perfect time this week. Yes! Finally, something perfect is happening. I'm so excited. I'm glad I'm here for you. I'm doing good, Trisha. I'm glad you're good too. Hi, Marianne. How are you, my friend? Oh my goodness. Well, I woke up this morning and I was kind of feeling a little under the weather. I have been freezing my tahukas off